I want to take a few minutes and talk about the Myth and Movement workshop in Lisbon coming up in October. And ultimately, this is a larger conversation about the work I do all the time in essentially everything that I do. But I specifically want to be talking to you in Lisbon who are interested in coming to this workshop. Myth and Movement. We will be spending this weekend in an exploration and a traverse inside of the archetypal world of story and fairy tale, a very particular story from Women Who Run with the Wolves, which is a profound book that I have been working with for over a decade. Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes Reyes is one of my root teachers, and I have studied that book and that work with her personally. And walking into the nourishing, incredibly alive world of archetype that comes to us through fairy tale and story. And then through the medium of archetypal qigong, which is a style of qigong that I have learned and been teaching for 11 years, that has an import of archetype and symbol and story that is very different than some other more abstract forms of movement and qigong. And then the third medium that I'll be working with is primal movement and working into the fluid body on the ground and floor work. When I started studying archetypal qigong over a decade ago, I started recognizing that inside of every form was a story about a particular energy, a particular archetype, a particular human process. And inside of the forms was an intelligence rooted in the principles of yin and yang and in the principles of Taoism, in the principles of a Chinese 5-element cosmology that understands that everything is always in motion, that we are a living process, that we are nature. One of the sentences and languages I get from Liz Koch of Core Awareness, who is a very deep teacher and colleague and friend of mine, is that the body is not an object. We do not have a body. We are a body. We are a natural process. What the body is a natural process. We are our bodies. We do not have a body. Our language is so deeply entrenched in an objectification of everything. We are a body. This is the way that our soul is expressing, is actually through the tissue and the cells of this body. And we are a natural process. We are not just like nature, we are nature. That is a deep principle and understanding inside of Taoism and Chinese 5-element theory. We are actually an expression of a natural process, just like the weather, the seasons, the growth of a tree and flowers, the movement of the ocean. That is not some like metaphor, not some new age ideal, but it is actually true. That is what we are expressing. And so as such, inside of the intelligence of an archetypal qigong form, what we have, and these are words that kind of dropped in about my work in the last decade, and I apply them to both story and archetypal qigong, is that they're at the same time, they are a map, they are a mirror, and they are the medicine in the very same gesture, in the very same breath, in the very same thing. Inside of archetypal qigong, as well as inside of story, inside of stories that have not been cut off, whitewashed, Disney-ified, endings that have not been anesthetized to serve a socialized culture, but endings that actually allow for the stories to be a teaching story of initiation. Stories that have endings that give us the kind of wake-up call of brutal loss and a sort of haunted existence if we do not claim our wildness, claim our agency, claim our knowing, that is actually the consequence. I'm working in a series right now with the story of the red shoes. That is a story that comes out of Women Who Run with the Wolves. And in that story, we have a motif, and a student brought this up in class the other day. It was so important about this particular story. There's a motif about a gilded carriage. This young girl who has a pair of red shoes that she has made from scraps, that she has fashioned, and that make her so, so happy, that she wears on her feet every day, even in the midst of her poor life, of her hard life, of her motherless life. This is a child without a mother. That she has these red shoes that give her meaning, that give her ground, that cloak her in a kind of handmade life and existence that speaks deeply in her bones. And the whole beginning of the setup of this story is that then one day, a gilded carriage rolls by with an old woman inside who promises her something, who makes a promise to her. And so begins the action of this entire story of the gilded carriage. And eventually this girl's red shoes are burned, are thrown away. And I won't go into the rest of the story. But at the end of this story, what we have is a brutal ending of essentially this young girl's feet getting cut off, her walking herself into the executioner's chamber, begging for this new pair of shiny red shoes that she no longer has agency to dance in the direction that she wants to be dancing in. But she is being danced by shoes that she can no longer take off. She is being danced into a frenzy, danced into madness. We have a motif here of shoes, this is familiar, right? Cinderella, the carriage, the savior of the prince, etc., etc. So at the end of this story, we end with a brutal ending of the cutting off of her feet, a profound grief and loss about the red shoes that were burned, a handmade life that she lost in service of another very empty, shiny, seductive promise. In the greater culture, what we have been given by Disney, by every fairy tale who has erased that ending, that fierce, brutal, bloody, real ending, is a story where the gilded carriage saves Cinderella and she gets to live inside of the capture of what has seduced her. That we are living inside of cultural myths that are celebrating our forgetfulness, our amnesia, our capture, our domestication, the rendering of us without an inner fire and fierceness that would turn around and say, absolutely not, I do not want what you're selling. That is a shiny, powerful seduction. And I will not give up what is nourishing and I know in my bones is what gives me meaning, is what allows me to feel connected to a power that is connected to this earth, to my ancestry, to my bones, to all of my inheritance. So inside of a story that is still intact, we have instruction. We have a map. We have instruction and information about how we got to where we are. One of the powerful things about story is that it lets us know that there's a way through. There's always a way through. It helps us, it takes us out of a pathologized psychological model of something being wrong, of some kind of complex, of something being broken, into an inevitable initiation that we all fall into in this life, which is falling asleep, especially the maps that I am working with in this particular workshop, and often are inside of the socialized feminine. Not just in women, in every body, in every gender, in every expression, deeply inside of the socialized feminine. We have these stories that have lulled us to sleep and have been held up as a cultural ideal. So inside of a story, what we have is a map that lets us know how we got there and how we get out of there. what we also have inside of archetypal qigong, of an archetypal form that carries a story, is a map. Is a map that when I begin to gesture into a story that I might not be just expressing any given day, because I perhaps have not met the circumstance today that would allow me to be expressing like that. We go to the forms to sort of meet ourselves in the fullness of who we are, regardless of whether the circumstance arrives to show us that in a given day. It's like we go to the well to drink before we get thirsty and dehydrated and laid up by the side of the road, right? Inside of a form in that we gesture physically is a map of, for example, what it is to move all the way to expansion. And once that gesture completes itself, there is nowhere for that expression to go, if it is to stay true, except to then turn and begin folding back in. It's like the seasons, right? The growth of spring, the expression of summer, the fullness of summer, the zenith, and then this beginning of this exhale that comes down and becomes autumn and eventually becomes winter. Inside of that form, which is not a full form that I'm showing you here, we have a map of true harmony, and we can understand where it is that we're getting stuck. Am I insisting on maintaining this? The only way to stay here in eternal shining is to insist, is to resist the next cycle, is to force it, is to not let the movement that's trying to happen. It's like a breath. We can't just take an inhale and stay inhaled forever without exhaling. So inside of every form, the reason I'm going on about this is to draw the parallel between story and archetypal form. We have a map of every form inside of this cosmology of forms. It's like we have forms about surrender, about courage, about cutting through, about clarity. What is it to surrender without crash landing to the ground in a kind of collapse, in a negative sense of the word? There is a very nourishing, positive necessity of collapse in the tissue body that is, it's kind of like our final relinquishment of control, etc. What we have a map. The next thing we have is a mirror. Inside of story and inside of form, we get to see ourselves. We lay our lives down, we lay our tissue down next to the form, and we get to say, where am I in this right now? And as we're inside of the form, and as we're trekking and traversing through the story, we're drinking the medicine in the very same gulp, in the very same moment. There are very few things that exist in the same holographic moment as a trustworthy map with instruction, as a trustworthy mirror that will show us exactly where we are and how we are, and in the same breath, the medicine that we need to be drinking in order to find the harmony that we're seeking. I have not seen or found many things that exist as all of those in one sphere. Real story that has not been cut off, and the archetypal work of these forms are these profound portals into a kind of nourishment, a waking up, a seeing, an instruction that is vital to our life force. Women and the socialized feminine, we have been socialized out of our ability to feel, to sense. We are stuck in our heads. We are either living in some pathologized psychological model, or in spiritual bypassing. There are so many modalities out there that lift us up and out of the primal knowing, the direct bone knowing of this animal body that is deeply rooted in the yin field, in the earth, in the mud and muck and power of the chthonic, chthonic, or that's also pronounced chthonic, of the earth, of blood, of mud, of this power of the yin field. We have been cut off from that, not by accident, historically, ancestrally, socially, culturally, through all kinds of forces pressing down on us. We have been severed from something that is instinctual. There's nothing wrong. What we're always seeking to find is what has been interrupted, what has been forgotten. This is not an addition of something that we aren't. This is a removal of obstacle, a seeing of what has put us to sleep. And the final modality or sort of avenue that we'll work with in this workshop is the work of primal movement and returning to fluid body on the ground, which allows for us to experience ourselves as an animal body, which is where instinct lives. It does not live in the thinking mind. It translates to the thinking mind what we know in our bones, what we know in our guts, what it is to be landed in our bones on this planet, to actually show up, to incarnate fully now, to not be floating above our lives, to not be moving at a speed and a velocity that keeps us hovering above the truths we need to see, the agency we want to enact, a kind of fierceness. What is it to be a woman, to be in the feminine, and to enact a kind of fierce motion through gesture, to also find the necessity of that fierce motion inside of the story that we're traversing into, to have all of that be waking up in psyche, in mind, in soul, in tissue, in bone. These are powerful doorways that have a kind of gravity to them, deeply embodied. We are in a moment, maybe we've always been in a moment where we have to come into ourselves in order to land on this planet, in order to respond to the change, to the evolution, to the innovation that is being asked of us. We go to the ground and go back to fluid body to let our patterns of habit, insistence, performance begin to dissolve, to let our bones, so many of us don't know what it actually is to live from a sensation of our bones being landed on the planet, literally. Like the sensation of bone landing on ground through gravity. That basic reality that we are often resisting, that we've often been severed from. We go to the ground to allow for this biomorphic intelligence that is our system to find coherence. We know our cells, our tissue. We are always seeking harmony. That is also a principle of 5 elements, Chinese 5 elements, and Taoism. There is never anything wrong. There is only the seeking of balance and the seeking of harmony. Our bodies, ourselves, we are always moving toward the gestures that will create balance and coherence for us. Can we stop resisting what it is that we know to be true? Can we stop holding back creative life energy that wants to express? Can we stop insisting on maintaining certain levels of performance and habit that are costing us everything? Can we allow cycles to express themselves? All that is happening inside of a story, inside of movement, whether that be fluid movement on the ground or inside of an archetypal world of archetypal form, is we're allowing and expressing cycles, the natural cycles, the rhythm and tide of right season, right cycle, breath. wave patterns? What is it to try to keep something alive, to give our own life force, to create artificial life support for something that is trying to die, that needs to die and to rest? What is it to use our own life force and all of our lives to resist something that is trying to be born? What is it to loop inside of a beginning without ever allowing for full power and full fruition to happen? What is it to insist on eternal false summer at the cost of everything? Always expressed light outward. What is it to insist on maintaining that? What do we have to use and become in order to resist the cycle of something reaching its zenith and beginning its journey back toward the earth, to dissolution, to decline, to winter? We are a natural process. The wisdom of our whole lives is trying to express inside of right cycle. One of the biggest methods and strategies for domestication and capture is to interrupt and take away our cycles. That happens in our bodies. That happens in the way we're living in our relationships and our lives. So what we are doing in this workshop is going through the incredibly powerful doorway and weaving together, because they are the same conversation, walking into the wilderness of a story that presents itself. I never know what story we're going to be working with until we show up in the room, because the story raises its hand. We come together in a community and we create a field. We create a field that we exist inside of and that begins to inform us. And a story, I've been working with these stories for over a decade in this way. I never know the story until we get there, and it always shows its face. It's beautiful and profound. We walk into a story, then we walk into forms where we begin gesturing pieces of the story. We lay down on the ground. We let our bodies drop, our bones land. We make a place for all of the coherence and movement that's trying to find its way, These workshops, the combination of this it's magic. It is profoundly nourishing. It is deeply engendering of a kind of trust. It begins to wake us up to the way that life is talking to us all the time. It opens our ears to a kind of intelligence and conversation that we're in. We are here to claim a kind of fierceness that has been conditioned out of us as women, as the socialized feminine. This workshop is open to everyone who wants to come. So I'm saying that because I just said as women, but as anyone who is contending with a socialized part of the feminine in themselves. There is a fierce kind of love, of trust, of deep power. What is true power coming from inside? What is that sense like? This is not a workshop of concept. It is not just psychology. It is not just, it is the nourishment of deep truth. We're here to come into coherence and congruence. So there's the marriage, the bringing together of story and movement and the work in fluid body and on the ground is a profound experience. It is a walk into the wilderness. I have been a wilderness guide, an actual backpacking wilderness guide, for 25 years. This work is the same thing that happens in the wilderness. It is a conversation with the deep intelligence of the natural forces of the world, of nature. It is a return to who it is that we are. It is powerful to be in a room with bodies, waking up into this kind of seeing. There is a quality of a sort of ritual movement. It is sacred work. It's deep. It's very beautiful. And it's a rare kind of medicine. So this speaks to the Myth and Movement workshop in Portugal. This also speaks to the workshop I'll be doing, Myth and Bone Knowing, with Liz Koch in London. We'll be doing a 1 day of movement and story. And this also touches into the Fierce Feminine workshop that we're doing in Amsterdam. But this is always sort of the mark of the work that I'm doing. There's a power in giving something form, in seeing the story that our bodies are telling us, in reaching for a story that gives us instruction, in uncovering the mythology of our lives, in moving toward a mythology that can become our life. So please reach out with any questions, and I hope you will join us. Thank you.